I first heard about the concept of one thing from you because of your coaching sessions. What is one thing? How do you use that with your clients?
Well, first of all, I give credit where credit's due, and it's Gary Keller wrote a book. He was one of the founders of Keller Williams. He wrote a book titled, I think it's Your One Thing or The One Thing, but it's an excellent book. Pretty easy to read. It makes a lot of sense. So he didn't originate the concept of one thing, but he kind of popularized that title.
Yeah.
And one of the points that he makes I'll give you 2 points that he makes in the book. And one of them is the word priority is a Latin word and it means first. It doesn't mean among the first, it means first.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, it's not really correct to speak of your priorities, although we all do it,
Yeah.
because you can't have more than one first, even in this modern day of everybody gets a participation trophy.
Yeah.
So that's one of the main concepts. The other one behind it is the 80-20 rule that most people are familiar with, that says that 80% of your benefit comes from 20% of your customers. 80% of your problems come from a presumably different 20% of your customers. But basically, there are certain areas where you get more bang for the buck if you concentrate on those areas. That's those areas within the 20%. And one of Gary Keller's exercises in his book is for you to sit down and write down 25 things that you would have called priorities if I hadn't corrected that on the Latin. 25 high impact things that you know you would like to do and could do and have an impact on your business. Then he applies the 80-20 rule. And so he said, if you have 25 things and you take 80 or choose 20% of them, which is 5 out of 20, and then eliminate the rest, you now have 5 things where you had 25. And then you do it again. You look at those 5 things and say, which of those 5 things would have the greatest impact if I got to work on it? You pick that, and that's your one thing. And I guess one last thing here is the principle of one thing is based on the fact that we cannot, as people, multitask. I read a lot about this a number of years ago, a lot of studies done on it. At MIT is one of them, and Harvard is another. And there is no such thing as multitasking. Some people who appear to multitask are really just doing fast switching. But there are all kind of data about how long it takes you to get, if you're working on one subject and you switch to another, there's a lag. There's some really good stats on that. But there's a lag before you can get up to speed. And then if you jump back to the other thing, you have to endure that lag again. So you're spending a lot of time jumping back and forth and wasting in transition. So picking the one thing that can have the greatest impact, and that's the one thing we're going to concentrate, is one of the major skills that highly effective managers have.
Yeah. I think that with the one thing, it's really important for it to be fairly narrow, because I think what will happen sometimes is that you'll choose one thing, but you'll keep it fairly broad. Like, well, I'm going to focus on our
Get
marketing.
more customers. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
get more customers. There we go. That's the one thing.
Which is
Well,
great. Like, hey, at least that's some level of focus that you're not going to put yourself into operations or whatever, but it's still not focused enough. And it just needs to be narrowed down. I think if we make a little acronym for one, it's optimized. So making sure that you actually have the energy, resources, time to be focused on that one thing. Because it's you just saying, hey, this is our one thing, but not really setting yourself up to actually focus on it doesn't really do anything. And then narrowed, where, hey, we actually have narrowed down to like this one thing. It's not this broad area, but it's very clear that this is the one thing we're going to do. We're going to make 10 calls a day to customers. Okay, like we can do that, right? And then effective. Hey, like let's choose something that's actually going to be able to make a difference, that it's not going to lead to just more questions or no results and leave us feeling like the one thing wasn't worthwhile. But yeah, optimized, narrowed, and effective. Choose
Yeah,
one
that's
thing to
great.
focus on. Um, I think the reality is, I think a lot of business owners know that they need to focus on just one thing, but practically it's pretty hard, especially when you're a small business owner and you founded the company. There's a lot of stuff going on. You've got you've got to hire a new employee. Someone just quit. You have to train someone. You are dealing with payroll issues or accounting issues. Customers hasn't paid your invoices. You're dealing with leads coming in that you need to close, but then you haven't to deal with the handoff, and there's just a lot of stuff going on, right? And how do you stay focused on one thing in the midst of all that?
Well, that's a really good point because we do talk about one thing, but it's not really one thing.
Yeah.
You still have to do what you have to do, and meaning all the things that you just mentioned, the day to day, the quotidian stuff. But what we're doing with our one thing is fighting our way out of that. I mean, that can be
Yeah.
maybe you need customers and marketing is where you need to go first, but a lot of times it's time management. We'll talk about it in future episodes, but delegation. But when we talk about the one thing, we'll talk about time blocking too in future. Well, we have in the past, but we will again in the future. The one thing is the thing that you're giving special emphasis to in your blocked out time.
Yeah.
You can't decide that you're going to write a great vision for your company and quit going to work because you're doing that.
Yeah.
But you can when there are 40 things all competing for your attention to improve and write a process and change things. You say, okay, all those need to be done, but I'm going to work on this one.
Yeah.
And to jump back to something you just said a little bit earlier when you were talking about optimizing and narrowing and being effective is uh, whenever I'm in a coaching session or whenever you're coaching yourself through something like this, everything needs to be reduced to something that you can actually do,
Yeah.
right? And like you said, oh, I'm going to do marketing. Okay, well, that's great. Well, what are you talking about? You're going
Yeah.
to choose some marketing channels. You're going to get with an expert and find out, learn about SEO. Maybe you're going to work with Google My Business. Even if you get to Google My Business, you narrow it down to that and you say, what am I going to do within that? I'm going to upload 5 pictures and I'm going to put up 2 blogs. Well, or in my case, first I'm going to learn how to do it, what the heck they're talking about, or find somebody to do it for me and concentrate on that till I get it up and running. So you're right. That optimizing and narrowing means getting it down to something you can actually do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got to be focused. And I think, you know, going back to your time block, you still have all of your responsibilities, but you do have to make special emphasis. And that's when you're going into the office on the weekends, or that's when you're staying up late on the computer. That's when you've cleared your Friday afternoon to just focus on your one thing, to give it that special attention, to optimize your calendar, your time, your energy, your resources for that one thing. And that's why it has to be narrow. That's why it has to be specific, something that you can actually go do. Because if you keep it so broad, what ends up happening is, one, you never arrive at a completion point of that one thing. And so it feels like this one thing is looming for months and months, and that you're not making any progress, which only leads you to not focus on the one thing because it doesn't feel like there's a reward there. But two, when you don't narrow it down and you give all this time to it, when you say it's just marketing, well, now you're spending Friday afternoon researching on the computer, looking on YouTube or whatever, what you can do for your marketing activities. And it pulls you in a million different directions of how you should focus on it. And now all of a sudden you're buying new software and you're, you know,
Trying to learn
trialing
how to
all these
run it.
different, yeah, you're really not making progress, essentially. You're playing house with the idea rather than actually like executing, right? So it's got to be something that's going to be effective.